The tornado siren screamed across Kansas as Marcus Thompson watched in horror. Three black SUVs had just pulled into his farmyard, and the woman stepping out of the lead vehicle wasn't the stranded traveler he'd rescued from the storm. She was Elizabeth Harrington, heiress to the agricultural empire that was about to steal his family's farm. "Mr. Thompson," the lawyer called out over the rising wind, "we already own your land. You've been making payments to us for months." Marcus felt his world crumble as he turned to face the woman he'd fallen in love with, the woman who'd shared his table, worked his fields, and promised to help save his farm. The same woman whose family fortune was systematically destroying every family farm in 3 counties. "Marcus, I can explain." Beth reached toward him desperately. "Explain what?" His voice was deadly quiet. "Explain how you've been lying about everything while gathering intelligence to steal my home." But as the storm clouds gathered overhead, mirroring the tempest in their hearts, neither of them knew that buried deep in her grandfather's will was a secret clause that could change everything if they were brave enough to trust each other one more time. What happens next will shock you if you're loving this story of love, betrayal, and redemption. Smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. The tornado sirens wailed across Millbrook County as Marcus Thompson gripped the steering wheel of his weathered Ford pickup. Squinting through the apocalyptic darkness, rain hammered his windshield like bullets, and the wind threatened to lift his truck clean off Highway 34. He should have been home by now, should have been in his storm cellar riding out what the Weather Service was calling a potentially catastrophic supercell. Instead, he was driving through hell itself because old Mrs. Patterson's prize bull had broken through the fence again. Lightning split the sky in jagged white veins, illuminating the landscape in stark, terrifying flashes. That's when he saw her, a figure hunched beside a silver sedan, tilted at a dangerous angle in the roadside ditch. Water already rising around the vehicle's doors, Marcus didn't hesitate. In farm country, you stop for anyone in trouble. No questions asked. It was the code his grandfather had lived by, his father had died by, and Marcus wouldn't break it now. He pulled over, emergency flashers cutting through the storm's fury. The woman looked up as his headlights found her mid-30s, maybe, with dark hair plastered to her skull and designer clothes that marked her as city folk. She was shivering violently, her expensive-looking purse clutched against her chest like a life preserver. "Ma'am!" Marcus shouted over the wind, jogging toward her. "You hurt?" "I'm okay," she called back, her voice barely audible above the storm's roar. "But my car, the engine died when I hit the water." Marcus glanced at the sedan. Even if the engine worked, the vehicle was nose deep in what would soon be a raging creek. "We need to get you out of here. This whole area floods in weather like this." Without waiting for a response, he grabbed her arm and guided her toward his truck. She stumbled once, her city shoes no match for the muddy terrain, but Marcus steadied her. Up close, he noticed her hands soft, manicured, clearly unused to physical labor. Chicago tourist, maybe, or a business traveler who'd taken a wrong turn trying to avoid the interstate traffic. "Thank you," she gasped as they reached his truck. "I thought I was going to die out there." "Not on my watch," Marcus replied, helping her into the passenger seat. "I'm Marcus Thompson. This is my stretch of road." "Beth," she said, accepting the thick farm jacket he pulled from behind the seat. "Beth Wilson. I was driving from Topeka to Kansas City when the storm hit. GPS said this was a shortcut." Marcus started the engine, already planning the route home. The main roads would be underwater by now, but he knew every back trail and farm road in the county. "GPS doesn't account for Kansas weather," he said with a slight smile. "Welcome to Tornado Alley, Miss Wilson." The drive to his farmhouse took 20 minutes through terrain that would have been impassable to anyone who didn't know it intimately. Beth sat quietly beside him, occasionally gripping the door handle when the truck bounced through a particularly deep puddle or climbed a steep, muddy incline through the chaos of rain and wind. Marcus found himself stealing glances at her. There was something unusual about this woman, a quality he couldn't quite place. She seemed fragile and strong at the same time, like expensive glass that had somehow survived a fall. The Thompson farmhouse appeared through the storm like a lighthouse, its windows glowing warm and yellow against the dark. The two-story structure had weathered 90 years of Kansas storms, built by Marcus's grandfather with timber from their own woodlot and a foundation that went down 8 feet into Missouri clay. It looked modest compared to the new construction going up in town, but it was solid, honest, and home. "It's beautiful," Beth said softly as Marcus parked near the front porch. Marcus looked at his house through her eyes, the peeling paint on the shutters, the front steps that needed replacing, the rain gutters he'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. "It's not much," he said, "but it's weathered worse storms than this." Inside, the farmhouse wrapped around them like a warm embrace. The living room still held traces of his mother's touch, hand-sewn quilts, family photographs in simple frames, the grandfather clock that had belonged to 3 generations of Thompsons. Marcus built a fire in the stone fireplace, while Beth stood dripping on the hardwood floors, taking in her surroundings with curious eyes. "The guest room's upstairs," Marcus said, poking at the logs until flames caught. "My mother always kept it ready for unexpected visitors. Said you never knew when someone might need shelter." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "Was," Marcus corrected gently. "She and Dad died in a car accident 4 years ago. Ice storm, much like this one." Beth's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm so sorry. That must have been incredibly difficult." Marcus nodded, the familiar weight settling on his chest. "They left me the farm, the land, and about $50,000 in debt. But they also left me their values. Help your neighbors, work honest, and trust that good things come to those who deserve them." He showed Beth to the guest room, apologizing for the simple accommodations: his mother's old quilts, a dresser that had seen better decades, and a window that looked out over the cornfields. Beth assured him it was perfect, more comfortable than any hotel she'd stayed in recently. Marcus left her with towels and one of his mother's nightgowns, promising that breakfast would be ready when she woke up, alone in his own room. Marcus lay awake listening to the storm rage outside. Tomorrow he'd help her figure out her car situation, maybe drive her to town to catch a bus or rent another vehicle. But for tonight, she was safe under his roof, and that felt like the most important thing in the world. What Marcus didn't know was that 3 floors below, in the guest room that had once belonged to his mother, Elizabeth Harrington, not Beth Wilson, sat awake in the antique rocking chair, staring out at the storm-lashed fields with tears streaming down her cheeks. For the first time in her 30 years, she felt like she'd found something real, something honest, something that made the fortune she'd inherited feel like a burden instead of a blessing. Dawn broke clear and brilliant, as if the previous night's fury had been a fever dream. Marcus woke to the sound of bacon sizzling in his own kitchen and the aroma of fresh coffee drifting up the stairs. He dressed quickly and headed downstairs to find Beth still wearing his mother's nightgown and one of his old flannel shirts standing at the stove with a competence that surprised him. "Hope you don't mind," she said, glancing over her shoulder with a smile that transformed her entire face. "I'm an early riser, and I wanted to thank you properly for last night." Marcus surveyed the kitchen. She'd found the good plates, the ones his mother only used for Sunday dinners, and set them with care. Fresh orange juice sat in his mother's crystal pitcher, and she'd somehow located the cloth napkins he'd forgotten he owned. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked, accepting a cup of coffee that was perfectly brewed. "My grandmother," Beth replied, a shadow crossing her face. "She raised me in Chicago after my parents, well, after they weren't around anymore. We didn't have much, but she made sure I knew my way around a kitchen." They ate breakfast as the morning sun painted the flooded fields in shades of gold and amber. Marcus found himself telling Beth about the farm, how his grandfather had cleared this land by hand, how his father had modernized the operation, how he was now struggling to keep it profitable in an economy that seemed designed to eliminate small farmers. "The bank's been patient," he admitted, surprised by his own openness. "But patience has limits. If this year's crop doesn't produce, I'll lose everything my family built." Beth listened with an intensity that made Marcus feel heard in a way he hadn't experienced since his parents' death. She asked thoughtful questions about crop rotation, soil management, and sustainable farming practices that revealed an understanding he wouldn't have expected from a city-dwelling secretary. "Would you show me around?" she asked as they finished eating. "I've never seen a working farm up close." The tour took most of the morning. Marcus led Beth through the barn where his cattle sheltered, past the chicken coop where Rhode Island Reds scratched in the dirt, and along the fence lines where his corn grew in neat, hopeful rows. She gamely navigated the muddy paths in borrowed boots, asking questions that revealed both genuine curiosity and surprising insight. "You rotate corn and soybeans?" she asked, studying a field where last year's soybean stubble poked through the soil. "Every other year," Marcus confirmed. "Soybeans fix nitrogen in the soil, makes the corn grow better. My grandfather figured that out long before it was fashionable." "That's brilliant," Beth said, and meant it. "Natural fertilization without chemical inputs. The profit margins must be better too." Marcus stopped walking and looked at her curiously. "That's not the kind of thing most people pick up on." Beth's cheeks colored slightly. I I read a lot. Business magazines, agricultural reports. It's fascinating how farming intersects with economics, environmental science, even social policy." They paused at the top of a small hill that overlooked the entire Thompson, spread 150 acres of rolling farmland that had supported 3 generations. In the distance, Marcus could see the boundaries where his land met the properties of neighbors who'd become like family over the years. "It's perfect," Beth said softly, and Marcus heard something in her voice that made him turn to look at her. "It's home," he replied simply. What Marcus couldn't see was the internal war raging behind Beth's calm exterior. Every acre spread before them, every story he told about his family's history, every detail about the farm's operation, it all felt like a betrayal of the secret she carried. 3 days ago, her lawyer had informed her that she owned not just this hill they stood on, but virtually every piece of farmland visible from it, the Harrington Family Trust, inherited from a grandfather she'd never met, controlled over 15,000 acres across 8 states, including 90% of the agricultural land in Millbrook County, including, she was beginning to suspect, the very ground beneath Marcus Thompson's feet. The next few days fell into a rhythm that felt natural to both of them. Marcus worked his daily routines feeding animals, checking irrigation systems, maintaining equipment while Beth helped wherever she could. She proved surprisingly adaptable, learning to gather eggs without getting pecked, to drive the old John Deere tractor in a straight line, and to identify problems with crops that Marcus had been dealing with all his life. "You're a natural at this," Marcus said on the third morning, watching her successfully repair a section of fence that had been damaged in the storm. "Maybe I missed my calling," Beth replied, testing the tension on the wire. "There's something satisfying about working with your hands, seeing immediate results from your effort." Marcus studied her profile as she worked. There was more to Beth Wilson than met the eye. Her hands might be soft, but they were intelligent. Her clothes might be expensive, but she wore them without pretension. And despite claiming to be a secretary from Chicago, she had insights into farming, business, and land management that suggested a much broader education. That afternoon, while Marcus was in town picking up supplies, Beth made a decision that would change everything. She called her lawyer. "Martin, it's Elizabeth," she said, using the kitchen phone while watching through the window for any sign of Marcus's return. "Thank God," Martin Ashworth's voice crackled through the connection. "Do you have any idea how worried I've been? You missed 3 appointments, and there are decisions that need to be made about the Millbrook County acquisitions. And that's what I'm calling about," Beth said, her stomach churning. "I want you to stop all land purchases in this area immediately." Silence on the other end. "Then Elizabeth, we've discussed this. The agricultural consolidation project will increase the value of your holdings by 40% over 5 years. The small farmers can't compete with industrial agriculture anyway. We're simply accelerating an inevitable process. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. Martin, these are people's homes, their families' histories. Elizabeth." Martin's voice carried the patronizing tone that had always made her feel like a child. "You're having an emotional reaction to something you don't understand. The Harrington Trust has specific mandates for growth and efficiency. Your grandfather's will was very clear about maximizing returns. Beth gripped the phone tighter. Whose land are we buying? Specifically, several properties. The Martinez Dairy Farm closed last month. They couldn't keep up with their mortgage after the drought. The Wilson place is under contract, and we're in negotiations for the Thompson Farm. Apparently, the owner is behind on his payments. The room spun around Beth. The Thompson Farm, Marcus's farm, the land she was standing on, the home that had sheltered her, the man who had saved her life. Her family's trust was destroying all of it. Elizabeth, are you there? Stop it, she whispered. Stop all of it. Don't buy another acre. I'm afraid that's not possible. Contracts have been signed. And more importantly, this is what your grandfather wanted. The trust is designed to... Beth hung up the phone and sank into one of the kitchen chairs, her head in her hands. Everything Marcus had told her about losing the farm, about fighting to keep his family's legacy alive, he was fighting against her, against money that belonged to her, against a fortune she'd never asked for and didn't want. The sound of Marcus's truck in the driveway sent panic through her chest. She couldn't face him. Not yet. Not until she figured out how to fix this mess. That evening, they sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Marcus had made dinner a simple meal of grilled chicken and vegetables from his garden, and they'd eaten in comfortable silence. But Beth could feel the weight of her secret pressing against her ribs like a physical thing. Marcus, she began, her voice carefully steady. What would you do if you could save the farm, if you had the resources to modernize, to make it profitable again? Marcus leaned back in his chair. Considering, I'd invest in sustainable irrigation. Maybe start a farmers market cooperative with the neighbors. There's demand for organic produce, but we need better distribution channels. He paused, looking out over his fields. But mostly, I just want to know it would be here for the next generation. That all this, he gestured at the landscape around them, wouldn't disappear into some corporate portfolio. What if someone offered to help a partner? Maybe, or an investor who understood what you're trying to preserve. Depends on the strings attached, Marcus said. I've seen what happens when outside money comes into farming. Usually, the farmer ends up as an employee on his own land. He turned to look at her. Why do you ask? Beth met his gaze, seeing honesty and trust in his eyes. Just curious about the business side of things. You make it sound so personal. Because it is personal, Marcus replied. This isn't just economics. It's about being connected to something bigger than yourself, about stewarding land for future generations. Corporate agriculture doesn't understand that. They see efficiency, profit margins, return on investment. They don't see the value in a farm that's been in one family for 90 years. Each word felt like a blade in Beth's chest. She excused herself early, claiming exhaustion, and lay awake in the guest room staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, she would have to tell him the truth. Tomorrow, she would have to find a way to explain that the enemy he'd been fighting had been sleeping under his roof, eating at his table, falling in love with everything he was trying to save. The next morning brought unwelcome visitors. Beth was helping Marcus repair a broken irrigation line when 3 black SUVs turned into the farm's driveway. Moving with the precision of a corporate convoy, Marcus straightened, tension radiating from his shoulders. Expecting company, Beth asked, though her stomach was already dropping. No, Marcus replied grimly, but I know what this is. The lead vehicle disgorged a man in an expensive suit who looked supremely out of place against the rural backdrop. He was followed by 2 assistants carrying briefcases and tablets, and what appeared to be a photographer with professional equipment. Mr. Thompson, the lead man called out, striding across the farmyard with the confidence of someone accustomed to being in charge. I'm David Morrison from Morrison & Associates. We represent the Harrington Agricultural Trust. Beth felt the blood drain from her face. She stepped slightly behind Marcus, hoping Morrison wouldn't recognize her from the corporate photographs that occasionally appeared in business magazines. "I know who you are," Marcus said, his voice hard. "And I know why you're here. The answer is still no." Morrison smiled with practiced charm. "Mr. Thompson, I think there may have been some miscommunication. We're not here to buy your farm. We already own it." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "That's impossible. I'm current on my mortgage payments." "Your mortgage?" "Yes," Morrison agreed, consulting his tablet. "But unfortunately, the bank sold your loan to a subsidiary of the Harrington Trust 3 months ago. You've been making payments to us, and I'm afraid you're significantly in arrears." "That's a lie," Marcus said, but Beth could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. Morrison handed him a thick folder of documents. "I'm afraid it's all quite legal. The good news is that the trust is prepared to offer you a generous settlement, enough to pay off your debts and start fresh somewhere else. You could even stay on as a farm manager if you're interested in continuing in agriculture." Beth watched Marcus's face cycle through confusion, anger, and growing despair as he examined the papers. Everything about the documents looked official, legally sound, and completely devastating. She knew, with sickening certainty, that Morrison was telling the truth. The Harrington Trust had bought Marcus's debt and was now foreclosing on the farm that had been in his family for 3 generations. "This can't be happening," Marcus said quietly. "I'm very sorry," Morrison replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But these decisions aren't made lightly. The trust has plans to consolidate this area into a more efficient agricultural operation. Your neighbors, the Martinez family and the Wilsons, have already agreed to sell. You're the last holdout." "Plans." Marcus's voice was rising. "This is my home, my family's home. And it will continue to be a productive farm," Morrison assured him. "Just under more efficient management. The trust believes in maximizing the agricultural potential of every acre." Beth felt like she was watching a nightmare unfold. Her money, her inheritance, was being used to destroy the very thing she'd come to love. She took a step forward, intending to stop this travesty. But Morrison's eyes found her, and his expression changed. "Miss Harrington." His voice was surprised but pleased. "I didn't expect to find you here. This is an unexpected pleasure." The name hung in the air like a curse. Marcus turned slowly to look at Beth, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and finally devastating understanding. "Harrington," he repeated softly, "as in the Harrington Trust." Beth felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Marcus, I can explain." "Explain what?" His voice was deadly quiet. "Explain how you're not Beth Wilson, secretary from Chicago. Explain how you're actually Elizabeth Harrington, the woman whose money is stealing my farm." "I didn't know," Beth said desperately. "I swear to you, I didn't know about any of this until—" "Until when?" Marcus demanded. "Until you'd gathered enough intelligence about my operation, until you'd figured out exactly how much this place was worth." Morrison was watching the exchange with growing interest. "Miss Harrington, I wasn't aware you were conducting a personal inspection of the property. Very thorough of you." "Shut up!" Beth snapped at Morrison, then turned back to Marcus. "Please, let me explain. I ran away from Chicago because I couldn't stand what my family's money was doing. I didn't know about the farm purchases until I called my lawyer yesterday. I tried to stop them." "Yesterday," Marcus's voice was hollow. "You've known since yesterday and said nothing." "I was trying to figure out how to tell you, how to fix this." "Fix this?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "You want to fix this? Give me back my farm. Give everyone back their farms. Stop pretending to be someone you're not." The pain in his eyes was unbearable. Beth could see everything they'd built together, the trust, the growing affection, the possibility of something real crumbling in real time. "Mr. Thompson," Morrison interjected, "if I might suggest—" "Get off my land," Marcus said quietly, but with such force that Morrison took a step back. "All of you, get off my land right now." "Actually," Morrison replied, recovering his composure, "it's Miss Harrington's land now, but we'll certainly respect your wishes regarding a transition timeline." Marcus looked at Beth one more time, and she saw something die in his expression. 5 years, he said quietly. I've been fighting to save this place for 5 years. Fighting banks, fighting weather, fighting an economy designed to crush people like me, but I never thought I was fighting someone who would look me in the eye and lie about who she was. Marcus, Beth reached toward him, but he stepped away. Don't, just don't. He walked toward the house, then stopped without turning around. I hope it was worth it, Miss Harrington. I hope whatever you learned here helps you sleep at night when you're counting your acres. Beth stood in the farmyard, tears streaming down her face, as Marcus disappeared into the house around her. Morrison and his team were already taking photographs and making notes, treating the farm like a commodity to be processed rather than a home to be cherished. Miss Harrington, Morrison said gently, perhaps we should discuss the transition plans back at the office. This is clearly an emotional situation. There won't be any transition, Beth said, her voice stronger than she felt. This farm stays with Mr. Thompson. Morrison's expression hardened slightly. I'm afraid that's not your decision to make. The trust has fiduciary responsibilities, legal obligations. I'm the beneficiary, Beth interrupted. This is my money, my inheritance, and I'm telling you to stop. Miss Harrington, with respect, you don't understand the complexities involved. Your grandfather's will establishes very specific guidelines for the trust's operations. The board of directors, your father included, have legal authority to, my father. Beth's voice was sharp. What does my father have to do with this? Morrison looked uncomfortable. Perhaps we should discuss this in a more appropriate setting. But Beth was done with secrets, done with being managed and protected from uncomfortable truths. Tell me now, what does my father have to do with the Harrington Trust? Morrison glanced around at his assistants, then sighed. Your father is the chairman of the Trust's board of directors. He's been overseeing the agricultural consolidation project personally. These farm acquisitions were his initiative. The ground seemed to drop away beneath Beth's feet. Richard Harrington, the man who had abandoned her and her mother when she was 3, who had left them to struggle in poverty while he built his business empire, had been using her inheritance to destroy farming families. Families like the one that had just taken her in and shown her more kindness than she'd known in years. Where is he? Beth asked quietly. Your father. He's at the regional office in Topeka, overseeing the consolidation project. Miss Harrington, are you quite all right? You look pale. You. Beth was already walking toward the house. She had to talk to Marcus, had to explain, had to find a way to make this right. But when she reached the front door, she found it locked. When she knocked, there was no answer. Marcus, please, she called through the door. Let me explain. Let me fix this. His voice came from somewhere inside, muffled but clear. You've done enough fixing. Miss Harrington, time for you to go home. Beth sank down on the porch steps, her head in her hands. Home. She didn't even know where that was anymore. The Chicago penthouse she'd inherited felt like a prison. Her father's mansion was the home of a stranger, and this farmhouse, where she'd felt more herself than anywhere else in her life, was now closed to her forever. Morrison approached cautiously. Miss Harrington, perhaps we should arrange transportation back to the city. We have a helicopter standing by. Beth looked up at him, this representative of the world she'd been born into and had never chosen. Do you know what this place is worth, Mr. Morrison? The agricultural assessment values it at approximately $1.2 million, though the development potential could easily triple that figure. No, Beth said softly, standing up and looking out over the fields where she'd learned to see the world differently. You don't know what it's worth at all. She walked toward the waiting cars, leaving behind the only place she'd ever felt truly at home. But as she reached the lead vehicle, she made a decision that would change everything. Morrison, she said, turning back to face him, I want to meet with my father. Today. Of course. Miss Harrington, I'll arrange a meeting for next week. Today, Beth repeated, her voice carrying an authority she'd never used before. And I want to see the original will. My grandfather's will. Every page, every clause, every provision. Morrison looked uncertain. Miss Harrington, that's quite irregular. Mr. Morrison, Beth said quietly, but with unmistakable steel in her voice. I own this trust. I own these lands. I own everything my grandfather left behind. And I think it's time I understood exactly what that means. As the convoy pulled away from the Thompson farm, Beth stared back at the house until it disappeared from view. She could see Marcus standing at an upstairs window, watching them leave. Even from a distance, she could feel the weight of his pain, his betrayal, his shattered trust. But she could also feel something else building inside her, a determination forged in farmhouse kitchens and irrigation ditches, strengthened by morning chores and evening conversations on front porches. Marcus had shown her what was worth fighting for. Now she was going to fight for it, even if it meant going to war with her own family. The Harrington Agricultural Trust headquarters occupied 3 floors of a gleaming office building in downtown Topeka, its windows reflecting the Kansas sky like mirrors. Beth stood on the sidewalk looking up at it, feeling like David approaching Goliath's fortress. Somewhere in that building, her father was making decisions that would destroy more farms, more families, more communities like the one that had welcomed her. She walked through the lobby with Morrison trailing behind, his earlier confidence replaced by nervous uncertainty. Word of her arrival had clearly preceded them. Employees in expensive suits whispered as she passed, and security guards spoke quietly into their radios. The executive floor felt like entering another world entirely, one of marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and oil paintings that probably cost more than most farmers made in a year. At the end of a long hallway, massive oak doors marked the chairman's office. Morrison knocked once, then ushered her inside. Richard Harrington looked exactly like the newspaper photographs Beth had seen over the years, but older, grayer, with the kind of deep lines that came from carrying heavy responsibilities. He stood behind a desk the size of a small car, and for a moment, father and daughter simply stared at each other across 30 years of absence. Elizabeth, he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. You look like your mother. Don't, Beth replied sharply. Don't you dare mention her. Not after what you did to us. Richard's expression didn't change. I assume you're here about the Morrison County acquisitions. Morrison briefed me on your objections. Millbrook County, Beth corrected. And they're not objections. They're orders. Stop buying the farms. All of them. I'm afraid it's not that simple, Richard said, gesturing for her to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. The trust has legal obligations, contractual commitments. Show me the will, Beth interrupted, remaining standing. Grandfather's will. I want to see exactly what he intended with this trust. Richard's eyes flickered with something that might have been respect. You've developed some backbone over the years. Very well. He pressed a button on his phone, and moments later, an assistant brought in a thick folder bound in legal ribbon. Richard opened it and spread several documents across his desk. Your grandfather, Charles Harrington, was a visionary. He began. He understood that small-scale agriculture was inefficient, unsustainable. He created this trust to modernize farming in the American heartland. Beth leaned over the desk, scanning the dense legal language. Most of it was standard trust documentation, but one section caught her attention: purpose and intent of agricultural holdings. Read it aloud, she said, pointing to the paragraph. Richard's jaw tightened slightly, but he complied. The trust shall acquire and consolidate agricultural properties for the purpose of implementing modern, efficient farming practices that will ensure food security and economic stability for future generations. Keep reading, Beth said, having spotted something else. The trust shall operate in the best interests of both the beneficiary and the rural communities affected by its actions, with preference given to preservation of family farming traditions where economically viable. Preservation of family farming traditions, Beth repeated, where economically viable. That doesn't sound like a mandate to destroy every family farm in Kansas. Richard closed the folder. Economic viability is the key phrase. Elizabeth, small farms simply aren't viable anymore. Says who? Beth challenged. Have you actually visited these farms? Talked to the families, seen what they're producing? I don't need to visit them, Richard replied. The numbers speak for themselves. Profit margins, efficiency ratings, yield per acre. What about the Thompson farm specifically? Beth interrupted. What makes it economically unviable? Richard consulted his computer screen. The Thompson property is 150 acres, grossly underutilized. The current owner is behind on his mortgage payments and lacks the capital for necessary infrastructure improvements. Under trust management, we could triple the property's productive capacity. Have you seen Marcus Thompson's crop yields, his soil conservation practices, his innovations in sustainable farming? I've seen the reports. From Hugh Morrison, some analyst who's never touched a plant in his life? Beth felt anger building in her chest. That man has forgotten more about farming than your consultants will ever know. Richard studied his daughter with growing interest. You seem remarkably invested in this particular farmer. Morrison mentioned you were staying at his property when our team arrived. I was stranded in a storm, Beth said carefully. He offered shelter. And in exchange, you offered him inside information about our operations. The accusation hit like a slap. I offered him nothing except gratitude for saving my life. Something you'd understand if you'd ever helped another human being without calculating the return on investment. That's enough, Richard said, standing up. Elizabeth, you're 30 years old. It's time you understood how the world actually works. Your grandfather's fortune didn't build itself. This trust didn't create itself. Everything you've inherited came from making hard decisions, from choosing efficiency over sentiment. Efficiency over humanity, you mean? Sometimes they're the same thing. Richard walked to the window overlooking the city. Do you know what Kansas farming looked like when your grandfather started buying land Dust Bowl conditions? Failed harvests? Families losing everything because they couldn't adapt to changing markets? He didn't destroy family farms. Elizabeth, he saved what could be saved and improved what needed improving. And what about what can't be improved? Beth asked quietly. What about the farms that are profitable, sustainable, well managed? What about families who don't want to be saved? Richard turned back to face her. Then they're welcome to buy their properties back at fair market value. With what money you're the reason they can't make their mortgage payments? We're the reason they have mortgages at all, Richard corrected. Before the trust started providing agricultural loans, most of these farmers had no access to capital. We gave them opportunities to modernize, to expand. If they couldn't take advantage of those opportunities, you set them up to fail, Beth realized, the full scope of the plan becoming clear. You give them loans they can't possibly repay, then buy their land when they default. It's a systematic takeover disguised as assistance. Richard's expression remained neutral. It's business, Elizabeth, and it's the business that pays for your lifestyle, your education, your comfortable existence in Chicago. A lifestyle I never asked for, Beth shot back. An education I paid for myself after you abandoned us. A comfortable existence built on the destruction of everything I've come to value. And what exactly do you value? Richard asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. A few days playing farm girl taught you the meaning of life. Beth thought of morning chores with Marcus, of the satisfaction of fixing broken equipment, of neighbors helping neighbors without thought of profit. She thought of conversations on front porches and meals shared around kitchen tables, of communities built on trust rather than contracts. I value authenticity, she said finally. I value people who honor their commitments, who take care of each other, who build things meant to last longer than the next quarterly report. Noble sentiments, Richard replied. Impractical, but noble, however. The trust has responsibilities that extend beyond your philosophical preferences. We have investors. Legal obligations. Show me the full will, Beth interrupted. All of it, every provision, every clause, every condition. Richard hesitated, then opened the folder again. Elizabeth, there are aspects of your inheritance that are complicated. Show me. With obvious reluctance, Richard turned to a section near the back of the document. Your grandfather included certain unusual provisions. Beth leaned over the desk, reading the dense legal language. Most of it dealt with standard trust management, but one section made her breath catch. Should the primary beneficiary demonstrate sustained commitment to agricultural stewardship through direct participation in farming operations for a period of not less than 1 year? And should said beneficiary enter into marriage with a qualified agricultural practitioner? The trust shall be dissolved and all holdings returned to their original owners or their heirs at a price not to exceed the original purchase amount plus reasonable improvements. Beth read the passage 3 times, making sure she understood every word. This says if I work as a farmer for a year and marry another farmer, the trust dissolves and all the land goes back to the original families. It's an archaic provision, Richard said quickly. Your grandfather had romantic notions about preserving rural traditions. The clause is legally unenforceable because you've never let me know it existed. Beth finished. How many other archaic provisions are buried in this document? Richard's silence was answer enough. Beth straightened up, her mind racing with possibilities. Marcus had shown her what real farming looked like, what authentic community meant. The people of Millbrook County had welcomed her without knowing who she was, had protected her from her own corporate security team, and now she discovered that her grandfather, despite his business empire, had understood something about the value of family farms that his son had forgotten. I want copies of everything, she said firmly. The complete will, all trust documents, every acquisition contract, every loan agreement, everything. Elizabeth, you're not thinking clearly. One romantic week on a farm doesn't qualify you to make decisions about a multi-billion-dollar trust. No, Beth interrupted, but 30 years of watching what money without purpose does to people's souls does qualify me. I'm the beneficiary, which means it's my decision to make. Richard studied his daughter with something approaching respect. And what decision is that? Beth thought of Marcus standing at his upstairs window, watching her leave. She thought of the trust in his eyes when he'd shared his dreams for the farm, and the pain when he learned who she really was. She thought of the life she could build in Millbrook County, if she was brave enough to claim it. I'm going to honor grandfather's will, she said. All of it, including the parts you've been hiding. The storm that hit Millbrook County 3 weeks later made the previous one look like a gentle spring shower. Weather services tracked it for days as it built strength across the Great Plains, a supercell system packing tornadoes, hail, and winds that could level buildings. The entire region was under emergency warnings, with mandatory evacuations for low-lying areas. Marcus stood in his farmyard, watching the apocalyptic sky with the practiced eye of someone who'd weathered Kansas storms his entire life. The livestock were secured in the reinforced barn. The equipment was moved to high ground, and his storm cellar was stocked with enough supplies to last a week. But none of that would matter if the tornado sirens now wailing across the county were accurate about the storm's projected path. He hadn't heard from Beth Elizabeth since the confrontation 3 weeks ago. The legal papers had arrived 2 days later, delivered by courier official foreclosure notices, eviction orders, and a generous buyout offer that would leave him debt-free but landless. He'd filed appeals, contacted agricultural advocacy groups, even reached out to local news stations, but everyone told him the same thing: the Harrington Trust had acted within their legal rights. The irony wasn't lost on him. The woman he'd rescued from a storm was about to destroy his life with the power of her inheritance, and now another storm was threatening to finish what her money had started. His phone rang as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. Marcus almost didn't answer, but the number looked familiar. Marcus! Beth's voice was barely audible over the rising wind. Thank God. Are you safe? Safe as anyone can be with an F4 tornado bearing down on them, Marcus replied, surprised by how his heart had jumped at the sound of her voice. What do you want? Elizabeth. I'm 10 miles out, but the roads are washing out. I need to talk to you. You're what? Marcus shouted over a crash of thunder. You're driving in this. Are you insane? Probably. Beth's voice crackled through the static. Marcus, I found something in my grandfather's will, a provision that changes everything, but I need to tell you in person. The line went dead as another lightning bolt split the sky. Marcus stared at his phone, torn between concern for Beth's safety and anger at her continued presence in his life. She was out there somewhere, driving through the worst storm in a decade, because she'd found some legal loophole that might save his farm or might make losing it hurt even worse. 20 minutes later, headlights cut through the storm darkness as a mud-splattered rental car slid into his driveway. Marcus ran out into the deluge, reaching Beth's door just as she struggled to open it against the wind. "You're crazy," he shouted over the storm, helping her toward the house. "The whole county's under tornado warning." "I had to come," Beth shouted back, her hair whipping around her face. "I had to tell you what I found." They made it inside just as the tornado sirens reached a fever pitch. Marcus slammed the door behind them and turned to find Beth standing in his kitchen, soaked to the skin, but with an expression of desperate hope on her face. "The storm cellar," Marcus said, grabbing emergency supplies. "We need to get underground, now." The cellar was a testament to 3 generations of Thompson men who understood Kansas weather, built into the hillside behind the house. It was reinforced with steel beams and stocked with enough food, water, and medical supplies to survive a week-long siege. Marcus lit the battery-powered lanterns while Beth wrung water from her hair and tried to catch her breath. "You said you found something," Marcus said, settling onto one of the wooden benches his father had built. "Some provision in your grandfather's will." Beth nodded, pulling a waterproof folder from her jacket. "Marcus, I've been fighting my father and the trust board for 3 weeks. They keep telling me I don't understand the complexities, that I can't just stop the farm acquisitions because of emotional attachments. And you believe them?" "I did, until I hired my own lawyer and demanded to see the complete will, not just the excerpts my father showed me, but every page, every clause." Beth opened the folder and pulled out photocopied documents. "My grandfather included provisions that my father has been hiding for 30 years. Marcus accepted the papers, studying them in the lantern light. The legal language was dense, but one section stood out clearly. Should the primary beneficiary demonstrate sustained commitment to agricultural stewardship through direct participation in farming operations for a period of not less than 1 year, and should said beneficiary enter into marriage with a qualified agricultural practitioner, the trust shall be dissolved and all holdings returned to their original owners or their heirs at a price not to exceed the original purchase amount plus reasonable improvements." Marcus read the passage twice, then looked up at Beth. "This says if you work as a farmer for a year and marry another farmer, the trust dissolves and gives back all the land." "At the original purchase price," Beth added. "Your family could buy back this farm for what your grandfather sold it for in 1994, plus the cost of improvements. The Martinez family could reclaim their dairy. The Wilsons could get their property back. Every family the trust has displaced could come home." Above them, the storm raged with increasing fury. They could hear debris hitting the house, the whistle of wind through gaps in the cellar door. The distant sound of sirens carried on the tornado's breath. But in their underground sanctuary, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. "Why would your grandfather include a clause like that?" he asked. "Because he understood something my father doesn't," Beth replied. "Grandfather grew up on a farm in Iowa. He knew the value of family agriculture, of communities built around the land. The trust was supposed to preserve farming traditions, not destroy them. And you think," Marcus began, then stopped. The implications were too large, too life-changing to voice. "I think my grandfather gave us a way to fix this," Beth said softly. "A way to undo 30 years of corporate takeovers and give the land back to the families who understand its true value." Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it seemed like the world was ending. Marcus studied Beth's face in the flickering lamplight, seeing determination mixed with something else: fear, hope, love. "There's just one problem," Marcus said carefully. "The marriage part of the clause. That would require—" "It would require us to get married," Beth finished. "I know." The words hung between them like a bridge that could be crossed or burned. Marcus thought of everything that had happened between them: the trust, the betrayal, the growing feelings that had survived even the revelation of her identity. "3 weeks ago, you left here hating me," Marcus said quietly. "Now you're proposing marriage to save my farm?" "I'm proposing marriage to save all the farms," Beth corrected. "And I'm proposing it because somewhere between gathering eggs and fixing irrigation lines, I fell in love with the man who showed me what really matters in life. Even though I'm just a struggling farmer who can barely keep his own operation afloat, because you're a farmer who understands stewardship, community, and the value of things that can't be measured in dollars. Beth moved closer to him on the narrow bench. Marcus, I know you don't trust me. I know I hurt you by hiding who I was, but I also know that what we built together during those few days was real. Another crash of thunder, closer this time. The tornado was directly overhead now, its fury shaking even their underground shelter. Marcus reached out and took Beth's hand, feeling the calluses she'd developed during her time on the farm. If we do this, he said slowly, if we actually go through with this plan, your father, the trust board, they'll fight us every step of the way. Let them, Beth replied fiercely. I have lawyers now, good ones, and I have something my father doesn't understand. I have a community that will fight with us. The farming requirement, Marcus continued, working through the logistics. You'd have to actually work as a farmer for a full year, not just play at it for a few days. I've been learning, Beth said with a smile. I know the difference between corn and soybeans now. I can drive a tractor in a straight line. I can fix a fence without electrocuting myself. It's hard work, Marcus warned. Dawn to dusk, every day. Bad weather, failed crops, equipment breakdowns, financial uncertainty. Sounds like the best job I've ever had, Beth replied. The storm's fury was beginning to diminish, the thunder moving off toward the east. In the relative quiet, Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the weight of a decision that would change everything. There's something else, he said quietly. Something I need you to know before you decide whether this is really what you want. What? Marcus took a deep breath. I love you too. Not Elizabeth Harrington, the heiress, not Beth Wilson, the secretary, but the woman who spent a week learning to be part of something bigger than herself. The woman who walked away from billions of dollars because she found something worth more. Beth's eyes filled with tears. Marcus, I love the way you listen when I talk about farming, like it actually matters to you. I love how you never complained about getting dirty or working hard. I love that you see this place the way I do, not as a business investment, but as a home. It is home, Beth whispered. It's the first place I've ever felt like I truly belonged. The tornado sirens were winding down, their warning replaced by the steady patter of rain on the cellar door. The worst of the storm had passed, leaving behind the kind of profound quiet that follows great tempests. So, Marcus said, squeezing Beth's hand, Elizabeth Harrington, will you marry me? Not for the trust clause, not to save the farms, but because I can't imagine facing another storm without you beside me. Beth's answer was to close the distance between them, her lips finding his in a kiss that tasted like rain and hope and the promise of a future built on solid ground. When they finally broke apart, she smiled through her tears. Yes, she said simply, to all of it, the marriage, the farming, the fight to save this community. All of it. Above them, the storm clouds were breaking apart, allowing the first rays of dawn to filter through. They climbed out of the cellar to find the farmhouse still standing, the barn intact, and the fields, while damaged, still capable of producing life. Marcus looked out over his land, soon to be their land, and saw not just a farm, but a symbol of everything worth fighting for. Beth stood beside him, her hand in his, and together they began planning not just a wedding, but a revolution that would return the heart of American agriculture to the families who understood its true value. The wedding of Marcus Thompson and Elizabeth Harrington took place 6 months later in the same farmyard where they'd first met during the storm. It was a simple ceremony. Beth wore her mother's wedding dress. Marcus wore his grandfather's best suit, and the Methodist minister who'd baptized 3 generations of Thompsons officiated under an arch of corn stalks and wildflowers. The guest list included every farming family in 3 counties, many of whom were about to become landowners again thanks to the dissolution of the Harrington Trust. The Martinez family had already broken ground on rebuilding their dairy operation. The Wilsons were planning an organic vegetable cooperative. Tom and Sarah Patterson were expanding their cattle ranch to include an agritourism program. Richard Harrington attended the wedding, though his expression suggested he was witnessing a financial disaster rather than a celebration. He'd fought the trust dissolution through 3 courts and 2 appeals, but the will's provisions were unambiguous. Elizabeth had completed her year of agricultural work documented by tax returns, soil conservation reports, and testimony from neighboring farmers. Her marriage to a qualified agricultural practitioner had been confirmed by Marcus's college degree in agricultural science and 20 years of successful farming experience. "I still think you're both insane," Richard said during the reception, watching his daughter dance with her new husband on a wooden platform built over the barn floor. "You've given away a fortune to play farmer." "No, Dad," Beth replied, pausing in her dance to look at her father. "I've traded a fortune for a life. There's a difference." The transformation of Millbrook County over the following year became a case study in sustainable agricultural development. The returned farms formed cooperative networks for equipment sharing, joint marketing, and knowledge exchange. Crop yields increased through sustainable practices rather than chemical inputs. Young families began moving back to the area, reversing decades of rural depopulation. Marcus and Beth's farm became the unofficial center of the new agricultural renaissance. Their farmhouse hosted planning meetings, their barn sheltered community events, and their fields served as demonstration plots for innovative farming techniques that balanced tradition with modern knowledge. On the first anniversary of the storm that brought them together, Marcus and Beth stood in the same spot where he'd first found her, stranded by the roadside. The road had been repaired, the ditches cleared, but they'd left a small stone marker to commemorate the night that changed both their lives. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked, watching the sunset paint their fields in shades of gold. "Just one," Beth replied, leaning into his embrace. "I regret it took a storm to bring me home." Above them, the Kansas sky stretched endless and clear, full of promise for whatever weather might come. They'd learned to weather storms together, both the kind that brought tornadoes and the kind that brought unexpected love. And in a landscape dotted with farmhouses where 3 generations had built their lives on hope and hard work, they'd found something worth more than all the money in the world: a place to belong, work that mattered, and love that could survive any storm. The farms of Millbrook County continued to thrive, their success measured not in quarterly profits, but in children's laughter, in soil that grew richer each year, in communities strong enough to weather whatever storms the future might bring. And at the heart of it all was a simple farmhouse where 2 people had discovered that the most valuable inheritance wasn't money or land, but the wisdom to know the difference between what could be bought and what could only be earned through love, commitment, and the courage to build something meant to last.